The summer sun bore down on Clearwater Creek with a fury that matched the glares Lucy Vaughn received at the Saturday market. She clutched her basket of homespun fabric tighter against her faded calico dress, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her like persistent flies. At 22, Lucy had long accepted her fate as the plainest woman in the Wyoming Territory, but acceptance didn't dull the sting of ridicule. "Look at those freckles scattered like mud across a wagon wheel," sneered Priscilla Henderson, the banker's daughter, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lucy kept her eyes fixed on the display of ribbons before her, pretending the cruel words hadn't reached her ears. Her fingers, calloused from years of needlework, trembled as she selected a simple brown ribbon that matched her dull auburn hair. Honestly, she shouldn't bother with ribbons. "Nothing's going to help that face," another voice chimed in, followed by muffled laughter. The year was 1878, and Clearwater Creek was growing from a dusty outpost into a proper town. New settlers arrived weekly, bringing with them dreams of prosperity and, for unmarried women, hopes of finding a husband. For everyone except Lucy, it seemed. "2 cents for the ribbon, Miss Vaughn," said Mrs. Peterson, the merchant's wife, her voice tinged with pity that cut deeper than outright cruelty. As Lucy fumbled with her worn coin purse, a shadow fell across the booth. She sensed rather than saw the tall figure that had approached, smelling of leather, horses, and the open range. "Add this blue one to her purchase," said a deep voice, rough as prairie grass but somehow gentle. "It'll match her eyes." Lucy looked up, startled. Standing beside her was a man she'd never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sky. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, dusty denims, a faded shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. The market fell silent as everyone turned to stare. Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks under the collective gaze. "I don't need charity, sir," she said quietly, embarrassment making her voice tight. The stranger's weathered face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made Lucy's heart stutter in her chest. "Not charity, miss, just appreciating beauty where I see it." His voice carried across the market as he laid a coin on the counter. "And she's the only beauty I see here today," Priscilla gasped, her perfectly arranged blonde curls bobbing in indignation. "Griffin Keegan, you can't possibly be serious." The man Griffin turned slowly, his eyes never leaving Lucy's face. "Dead serious, Miss Henderson. Some folks wouldn't recognize true beauty if it danced a jig on their dinner plate." Lucy stood frozen, the brown ribbon clutched in one hand while Mrs. Peterson pressed the blue one into her other. No one had ever defended her before, let alone called her beautiful. It had to be mockery a different kind, but mockery nonetheless. "Thank you, but I must be going," Lucy murmured, tucking both ribbons into her basket and turning to leave. "Miss Vaughn," Griffin called after her, "I'd be honored if you'd allow me to walk you home." Whispers erupted around them like wildfire in dry grass. Lucy paused, suspicious of his intentions but unable to deny the sincerity in his eyes. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice barely audible. Griffin stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Because I meant what I said. And because I reckon you've spent enough time walking alone." Lucy studied his face, searching for signs of deception. Finding none, she gave a small nod. As they left the market together, Lucy was acutely aware of the stares burning into her back. She kept her eyes fixed on the dusty street ahead, waiting for Griffin to reveal his true purpose. "I'm new to town," he said as they walked. "Just signed on with the Circle M Ranch last week, cattle drive from Texas." "I know the Circle M," Lucy replied cautiously. "My father does carpentry work for Mr. Mitchell sometimes." Griffin nodded. "Good man, Mitchell, fair wages, doesn't work his men into the ground." He glanced at her. "Your father's a carpenter then?" "Yes, it's just the two of us since my mother passed 6 years ago." Lucy didn't know why she was sharing this information with a stranger, but something about Griffin's steady presence made the words flow naturally. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice touched something in Lucy that had been numb for years. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the modest cabin on the outskirts of town that Lucy shared with her father. The small structure was well maintained, with a vegetable garden to one side and a workshop attached to the back. "This is me," Lucy said, stopping at the gate. "Thank you for walking with me, Mr. Keegan." "Griffin," he corrected with a smile. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Vaughn." "Lucy," she offered in return, surprising herself. Griffin removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Lucy," he repeated, as if savoring the name. "Might I call on you tomorrow, perhaps after church?" Lucy's heart fluttered traitorously in her chest. "Why would you want to do that?" Griffin's expression grew serious. "Because in a town full of painted roses, you're a wildflower, honest and real." "I'd like to know you better if you'll allow it." Lucy hesitated. Years of mockery had built walls around her heart, and she wasn't sure she could survive the humiliation if this turned out to be an elaborate joke. "My father will be home," she said finally. "You can call after 2. Griffin's smile returned, brighter than before. "I'll be here." He placed his hat back on his head with a slight bow. "Until tomorrow, Lucy Vaughn." Lucy watched him walk away, his stride confident and unhurried. Only when he disappeared around the bend did she allow herself to touch the blue ribbon in her basket. Wondering what tomorrow might bring, inside the cabin, Lucy found her father, George Vaughn, bent over his workbench, carefully sanding a chair leg. At 48, he was still strong, though silver threaded through his once auburn hair and grief had etched permanent lines around his eyes. "You're back early," he observed without looking up. "Everything all right at market?" Lucy hung her shawl on the peg by the door. "Yes, Pa. I got the thread you needed for your upholstery work." George finally glanced up, his practiced eye catching the flush on his daughter's cheeks. "Something happened," he stated rather than asked. Lucy busied herself with unpacking her basket. "I met someone, a new cowhand at the Circle M." Her father set down his tools, giving her his full attention. "Oh. His name is Griffin Keegan. He defended me when the Henderson girl and her friends were being unkind. He walked me home." Lucy hesitated, then added, "He asked to call on me tomorrow after church." George's eyebrows rose. "And what did you tell him? That he could come after 2? Lucy met her father's gaze. "Do you think I'm being foolish?" Her father considered this for a moment. "I think you deserve happiness, Lucy girl, but be careful with your heart. Cowboys aren't known for putting down roots." Lucy nodded, though her mind was already spinning with thoughts of Griffin's storm-gray eyes and the way he'd looked at her as if he truly saw her when everyone else looked through her. That night, for the first time in years, Lucy carefully examined herself in the small mirror above her washbasin. Her reflection was familiar heart-shaped face covered in freckles, wide-set blue eyes, a nose perhaps too small for her features, and lips neither full nor thin but somewhere in between. Her hair, which she usually kept in a simple braid, fell in waves to her waist, the color of autumn leaves. Plain, ordinary, unremarkable. These were the words she'd heard all her life, yet Griffin had called her beautiful, a wildflower among roses. Lucy plaited her hair for bed, wondering what he saw that no one else, not even she, could see. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Lucy put on her best dress, a modest blue cotton that she'd sewn herself, and pinned her hair up with extra care. After a moment's hesitation, she tied the blue ribbon Griffin had bought her around her braid. Church was the usual mixture of piety and gossip. Lucy sat beside her father in their usual pew, feeling the stares and whispers from the Henderson family and their circle. For the first time, she found herself scanning the congregation for a pair of storm-gray eyes, but Griffin wasn't there. Disappointment settled in her stomach like a stone. Perhaps he'd already forgotten his promise, or worse, it had all been a cruel joke after all. After the service, Priscilla Henderson made a point of stopping Lucy on the church steps. "Don't tell me you're actually waiting for that drifter," she said with false sweetness. "Men like that say all sorts of things to get what they want, Lucy. I thought even you would know that." Lucy lifted her chin slightly. "Good day, Priscilla," she said quietly, taking her father's arm and walking away. George patted her hand sympathetically as they made their way home. "Don't let her get to you, Lucy girl." "I'm trying not to, Pa." They ate a simple lunch of bread and stew, and Lucy found herself glancing repeatedly at the small clock on the mantel as 2 o'clock approached. When it chimed the hour, she jumped slightly, earning a knowing look from her father. "I'll be in the workshop," he said tactfully. "Call if you need me." Lucy nodded gratefully. She busied herself with cleaning up their lunch dishes, straining to listen for hoofbeats or a knock at the door. By 2:30, her hope had begun to fade. Then she heard the distinct sound of a horse approaching at a walk, followed by the creak of their gate. Lucy wiped her hands on her apron, removed it hastily, and smoothed her hair before the knock came. She opened the door to find Griffin standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. He wore clean clothes, a white shirt under a brown vest, pressed trousers, and polished boots. In his free hand, he held a small bunch of wildflowers. "I apologize for missing church," he said immediately. "One of the horses took sick and I couldn't leave until the veterinarian arrived." Relief washed over Lucy. "It's all right, I understand." Griffin held out the wildflowers, purple and yellow blossoms gathered from the prairie. "For you." "Like I said, wildflowers are the true beauties." Lucy accepted them with a smile, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you. Would you like to come in? I can make coffee." "I'd like that very much." She led him into the small but tidy main room of the cabin, gesturing for him to sit at the table while she put the flowers in water and set about preparing coffee. "This is a fine home," Griffin observed, looking around at the simple furnishings, most handcrafted by her father. "Solid craftsmanship. My father made most of it," Lucy said proudly as she placed the coffee pot on the stove. "He's very talented." As if summoned by his name, George emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands on a rag. "Thought I heard voices," he said, studying Griffin with a craftsman's evaluating eye. Griffin immediately stood and extended his hand. "Griffin Keegan, sir. I work for the Circle M. George Vaughn." Her father shook Griffin's hand firmly. "What brings you to our door, Mr. Keegan?" "Your daughter, sir," Griffin answered honestly. "I had the pleasure of meeting her yesterday and hope to become better acquainted with your permission." George's expression remained neutral. "And what are your intentions toward my daughter, Pa?" Lucy protested, embarrassed by the directness of the question. Griffin, however, didn't seem flustered. "Honorable ones, Mr. Vaughn. I'd like to court Lucy properly if she's willing." George studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough. But know this, my Lucy's been hurt enough by this town. I won't stand for any more of it." "Neither will I, sir," Griffin replied, his voice firm with conviction. Lucy watched this exchange with a mixture of mortification and wonder. No man had ever asked to court her before, and here was Griffin, declaring his intentions openly after having met her only once. The coffee ready, Lucy served the two men, and the conversation turned to safer topics: the Circle M, Griffin's work as a cowhand, and George's latest carpentry projects. Lucy learned that Griffin was 26, had been riding the cattle trails since he was 17, and had decided to settle in Wyoming Territory after falling in love with its wild beauty. "I'm tired of drifting," he admitted. "Been saving up to buy my own place someday." George nodded approvingly. A man needs roots. After an hour, Griffin rose to leave. "I should get back to the ranch. Chores don't do themselves." George excused himself tactfully, returning to his workshop after extracting a promise from Griffin to join them for Sunday dinner the following week. At the door, Griffin turned to Lucy. "Would it be all right if I called on you again before then? Perhaps Wednesday evening?" Lucy nodded, warmth spreading through her chest. "I'd like that." Griffin smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "So would I." "Thank you for the coffee, Lucy." As she watched him ride away, Lucy felt something unfamiliar taking root in her heart: hope, fragile as a spring bud but just as determined to grow. True to his word, Griffin returned on Wednesday evening. This time, he brought a small paper package that he presented to Lucy somewhat shyly. "Candy sticks from the general store," he explained as she unwrapped them. "The shopkeeper said you favor peppermint." Lucy was touched that he'd gone to the trouble of asking about her preferences. "Thank you." That was thoughtful. They sat on the porch swing that her father had built years ago for her mother, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Griffin told her stories of his travels, cattle drives through the Dakotas, winters in Texas, the vast open spaces of Montana Territory. But none of those places ever felt like they could be home, he said, his voice soft in the gathering twilight. Until now. Lucy glanced at him, wondering if he meant Clearwater Creek or something more specific. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that made her pulse quicken. As the weeks passed, Griffin's visits became a regular part of Lucy's life. Every Wednesday evening and Sunday afternoon, he would arrive, sometimes with small gifts, a ribbon, candy, once a book of poetry that he admitted the bookseller had helped him select. "I'm not much for reading fancy words," he confessed. "Never had much schooling." But the lady said these poems were about finding beauty in simple things, and that made me think of you. During these visits, Lucy learned more about Griffin's past. He'd been orphaned at 12 when influenza took both his parents, after which he'd worked odd jobs on farms and ranches until he was old enough to join a cattle drive. He'd had no real home since then, just a series of bunkhouses and camps under the stars. "It's a lonely life," he admitted one evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. "Never bothered me much before, but lately I've been thinking it might be nice to have someone to come home to." Lucy's heart fluttered at his words, but she was still cautious. Despite Griffin's consistent attention, she couldn't quite believe that someone like him, handsome, kind, respected by his peers, could truly be interested in someone like her. This doubt was reinforced every time she went to town. The whispers had changed but not disappeared. Now people speculated about what Griffin could possibly see in plain Lucy Vaughn, and how long it would be before he moved on to prettier prospects. Priscilla Henderson was particularly relentless. "It's just novelty," she told Lucy one day at the general store, her voice dripping with false concern. "Men like Griffin Keegan don't settle for simple girls like you. He'll be gone with the next cattle drive, mark my words." Lucy said nothing, but the words burrowed under her skin like splinters, painful and persistent. That Sunday, when Griffin arrived for dinner, Lucy was quieter than usual. Her father, sensing her mood, made an excuse to visit a neighbor after the meal, leaving the young couple alone. "What's troubling you, Lucy?" Griffin asked as they sat in the parlor, the late summer breeze drifting through the open window. Lucy twisted her hands in her lap. "People talk," she said finally. "They wonder why you spend time with me when there are so many prettier girls in town." Griffin's expression darkened. "People need to mind their own business." "But they're right, aren't they? I'm not beautiful like Priscilla Henderson or charming like the Miller twins. I'm just plain." Griffin leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "Lucy Vaughn, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "From the moment I saw you in that market, standing tall despite those vultures circling around you, I knew you were something special. Your beauty isn't in painted lips or store-bought curls, it's in the kindness you show to Mrs. Peterson's children, the skill in your needlework, the way you really listen when someone speaks." His grip on her hands tightened. "It's in your eyes that reflect the sky and your smile that you give so rarely that it feels like a gift when you do." Lucy's breath caught in her throat as Griffin continued, his voice growing more passionate. "The others, they're like those fancy porcelain dolls in the shop window, pretty to look at but hollow inside. You're real, Lucy. Everything about you is true, and that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Tears pricked at Lucy's eyes. "You really mean that, don't you? Every word." Griffin reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I've seen a lot of this country, Lucy, met all kinds of people, never felt for anyone what I feel for you." Lucy's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must hear it. "And what do you feel?" Instead of answering with words, Griffin leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips softly against hers in a kiss so sweet and tender that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. When they parted, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Lucy Vaughn, have been since that first day at the market." Lucy closed her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she'd never dared to hope for. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. Griffin's smile was radiant as he kissed her again, this time with more confidence. Lucy's doubts didn't disappear entirely, but in that moment, wrapped in Griffin's arms, they retreated to the far corners of her mind. As summer gave way to autumn, Griffin and Lucy's courtship blossomed like the wildflowers he still brought her regularly. He had a knack for finding them even as the weather cooled hardy blooms that persisted despite frost and wind, much like Lucy herself. The town's gossip gradually shifted from incredulity to reluctant acceptance, as it became clear that Griffin's interest in Lucy was neither a passing fancy nor a joke. Some, like Priscilla Henderson, maintained that he would eventually come to his senses, but others began to see what Griffin saw: the quiet strength and genuine warmth that Lucy possessed. In early October, Griffin invited Lucy to a harvest dance being held at the Circle M Ranch. "The boys have been pestering me to introduce you properly," he explained. "They think I've made you up since I talk about you so much." Lucy was nervous about attending. Such social gatherings had always been ordeals for her, filled with sidelong glances and whispered comments. But the thought of seeing where Griffin worked, of meeting his friends, outweighed her apprehension. "I'd love to go," she said, already mentally cataloging what she would wear. The night of the dance, Griffin arrived at the Vaughn cabin in a borrowed wagon, dressed in his best clothes with his hair slicked back. His face lit up when Lucy emerged in a dress she had sewn specially for the occasion, deep blue fabric that complemented her eyes, with delicate embroidery she had worked on during the evenings. "You look beautiful," Griffin breathed, helping her into the wagon. The Circle M barn had been transformed for the harvest celebration. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space cleared for dancing. A makeshift band played lively tunes, and tables laden with food and drink lined one wall. As Griffin led Lucy into the barn, she felt the now familiar sensation of being the focus of curious stares. But these were different, interested rather than malicious, and quickly followed by friendly nods or smiles. "So this is the famous Lucy," said a burly ranch hand, approaching with a grin. "Griffin won't shut up about you. I'm Bill, by the way." "Pleased to meet you," Lucy replied, surprised by the warmth of his greeting. Throughout the evening, Griffin introduced her to what seemed like every employee of the Circle M, from the cook to the ranch foreman. Each was respectful, many openly admiring of the woman who had captured their friend's heart. "You've got yourself a good man there," the foreman's wife told Lucy as they watched Griffin chatting with his colleagues. "When he first signed on, my husband said he had honest eyes." "That's rare in this business." Lucy nodded, watching Griffin laugh at something one of the other hands said. "Yes, he is a good man." When the band struck up a waltz, Griffin appeared at her side, hand extended. "May I have this dance, Miss Vaughn?" Lucy hesitated. "I'm not very practiced," she admitted. Griffin's smile was reassuring. "Neither am I. We can learn together." And so they did, stumbling occasionally but laughing through their mistakes. As Griffin held her close, guiding her around the floor with more enthusiasm than skill, Lucy forgot to be self-conscious. She forgot the years of feeling invisible or worse, being seen only to be judged and found wanting. In Griffin's arms, she was exactly where she belonged. Later, as they stood outside catching their breath after a particularly energetic reel, Griffin took her hand and led her away from the barn, toward a small rise where they could see the ranch spread out below them, silvered by moonlight. "I wanted to show you this," he said, gesturing to the view. This is what I see when I ride out in the mornings. Makes me feel like the luckiest man alive, working in a place like this." Lucy gazed at the peaceful scene, the main house with smoke curling from its chimney, the bunkhouse where Griffin slept, the corrals and barns, all nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Griffin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. In the moonlight, his face was solemn yet filled with a quiet joy that made Lucy's heart skip. "Not as beautiful as you," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Lucy, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Lucy's breath caught as Griffin dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I love you, Lucy Vaughn. I want to build a life with you, a home, a family, everything I never thought I'd have. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Lucy's eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Griffin, I'll marry you." Griffin let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley. He stood and swept Lucy into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy with laughter and love. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that glinted in the moonlight, a ring, simple but beautiful, with a small blue stone that matched her eyes. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically as he slipped it onto her finger. "But the blue reminded me of you." Lucy stared at the ring, overwhelmed. "It's perfect. How did you afford this?" Griffin looked slightly embarrassed. "Been saving up for a while now. Was going to put it toward land, but then I met you and I knew what I really wanted was a future with you in it. The land can wait." Lucy's heart swelled with love for this man who had seen her when no one else did, who valued her above his own dreams. She reached up to touch his face, memorizing the feel of his skin beneath her fingertips. "I love you, Griffin Keegan." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "And I love you, Lucy Vaughn, soon to be Lucy Keegan." The thought of taking his name, of becoming his wife, filled Lucy with a happiness so complete it was almost painful. As they walked back to the dance, hand in hand, she knew that no matter what the future held, she would face it with Griffin by her side, and that made all the difference. News of Lucy and Griffin's engagement spread through Clearwater Creek like wildfire. The reactions were mixed: genuine congratulations from some, thinly veiled surprise from others, and open disbelief from a few, including Priscilla Henderson, who made a point of telling anyone who would listen that it wouldn't last. Lucy found she cared less about such opinions than she once had. Griffin's love had given her a confidence she'd never possessed before. She walked taller, smiled more freely, and even began to see in herself some of the beauty he claimed was there. With winter approaching, they set a date for the following April, giving them time to prepare. Griffin continued working at the Circle M, saving every penny he could, while Lucy sewed her wedding dress in the evenings after finishing her regular work. One cold November day, Lucy was returning from the mercantile when she encountered Priscilla outside the town's only restaurant. The banker's daughter was with two friends, and all three women fell silent as Lucy approached. "Good afternoon," Lucy said politely, intending to pass by without further interaction. "Lucy," Priscilla called, her voice syrupy sweet, "we were just talking about you, or rather, about poor Griffin." Lucy paused, knowing she should walk away but unable to stop herself from asking, "What about Griffin?" Priscilla exchanged glances with her companions. "Well, it's just that everyone knows cowboys get restless in the winter months. Stuck in the bunkhouse with nothing to do but think about what or who they're missing." "Griffin isn't missing anything," Lucy said firmly, though an unwelcome seed of doubt tried to take root in her mind, "if you say so." Priscilla smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "But I saw him riding out with Melissa Turner yesterday. They seemed quite friendly." Lucy's stomach clenched. Melissa Turner was the new schoolteacher, young, pretty, and well-educated, everything Lucy was not. "I'm sure there was a perfectly innocent explanation," Lucy managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. Priscilla shrugged delicately. "Probably. I just thought you should know as a friend." Lucy nodded stiffly and continued on her way, Priscilla's words echoing in her mind. She tried to dismiss them. Griffin loved her, had chosen her, had asked her to be his wife. But the old insecurities, momentarily banished by happiness, crept back into her thoughts. That evening, when Griffin came to call, Lucy found herself watching him closely, looking for signs of dissatisfaction or restlessness. He seemed the same as always, affectionate, attentive, his eyes lighting up when she entered the room, but doubt, once planted, was difficult to uproot. "Is something wrong?" Griffin asked as they sat before the fire, noticing her unusual quietness. Lucy hesitated, embarrassed to voice her concerns yet unable to pretend all was well. "I heard you were riding with Melissa Turner yesterday," she said finally, hating the note of insecurity in her voice. Griffin looked surprised, then understanding dawned on his face. "Yes, I was. I was escorting her to the Taylor farm. Their youngest has been ill and she was bringing schoolwork so the child wouldn't fall behind." Relief washed over Lucy, followed quickly by shame for having doubted him. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have listened to gossip." Griffin took her hand, his expression serious. "Lucy, look at me." "Who told you this?" "Priscilla Henderson," she admitted. "She made it sound as if you might be having second thoughts about us." Anger flashed in Griffin's eyes. "That woman has a viper's tongue. Lucy, I love you, only you. I've never given Miss Turner or any other woman a second glance since the day I met you at that market." Lucy squeezed his hand. "I know, I'm sorry for doubting you, even for a moment." Griffin's expression softened. "Don't be, it's not your fault. People like Priscilla can't stand to see others happy." He paused, considering. "Maybe we should move up the wedding." Lucy blinked in surprise. "Move it up to when?" "Christmas," Griffin suggested. "I know it's soon, but why wait? I love you, you love me. The rest is just details." The idea was appealing, becoming Griffin's wife sooner rather than later, starting their life together before the new year. But practical considerations gave Lucy pause. What about a place to live? And saving for land? Griffin's smile was confident. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Mr. Mitchell offered me the old Lawson cabin. Said we could fix it up and live there until we can afford our own place. It's small, but it's on Circle M land, which means I'd be close to work." Lucy's heart raced at the thought. The Lawson cabin had been empty for years, ever since the elderly couple who owned it had moved east to live with their daughter. It was indeed small, just 2 rooms, but with some work, it could be a cozy first home. "Christmas," she repeated, letting the idea take hold. "That would mean just over a month to prepare," Griffin finished for her. "Is that enough time for you to finish your dress and whatever else needs doing?" Lucy mentally calculated the work remaining on her wedding gown and the other preparations required. It would mean long nights of sewing by lamplight, but it was possible. "Yes," she said, excitement building within her. "Yes, I think it is." Griffin's face broke into a radiant smile. "Then let's do it. Let's get married on Christmas Day." He sealed the decision with a kiss that left Lucy breathless and more certain than ever that this was right, that he was right for her, and she for him. The next month passed in a whirlwind of activity. Lucy finished her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory fabric with delicate embroidery at the neckline and hem. Griffin, with help from the other ranch hands, set about repairing the Lawson cabin, replacing broken windows, fixing the roof, and building new furniture with lumber donated by Lucy's father. The entire town soon knew of the change in plans. Some, like Mrs. Peterson at the Mercantile, were genuinely happy for the couple and offered gifts or assistance. Others, predictably, were less supportive. "Christmas Day? How desperate," Priscilla remarked loudly enough for Lucy to hear when they crossed paths at church. "I suppose she's afraid he'll change his mind if she gives him too much time to think." Lucy pretended not to hear, though the words stung. She was learning that some people would never approve, no matter what she did, and their opinions mattered far less than the love she and Griffin shared. As December progressed, and the wedding day drew nearer, Lucy's excitement was tempered with growing nervousness. Not about marrying Griffin, of that she was completely certain, but about being a wife, about intimacy, about whether she would disappoint him in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The night before the wedding, as snow fell gently outside, Lucy confided these fears to her father as they sat by the fire in their cabin. "Pa, what if I'm not? What if I don't know how to be a good wife?" she asked, her voice small. George set aside the wooden box he was carving as a wedding gift and regarded his daughter with understanding eyes. "Your mother asked me the same question the night before our wedding," he said, surprising Lucy. "And I'll tell you what I told her: there's no instruction book for marriage. You learn as you go together." He reached out to take her hand. "But I will say this, Lucy girl. A good marriage isn't built on knowing everything from the start. It's built on love, respect, and a willingness to grow together. And from what I've seen of Griffin Keegan, he has all three in abundance. So do you." Lucy squeezed her father's hand, grateful for his wisdom. "I wish Mama was here," she said softly. "So do I," George replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But she'd be so proud of you, Lucy. So proud of the woman you've become and the life you're building." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire and thinking of the woman who had been gone for 6 years, but whose presence was still felt in the home she had made warm and loving. "I have something for you," George said eventually, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and handed it to Lucy. "This was your mother's. She wanted you to have it on your wedding day." With trembling fingers, Lucy opened the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. A delicate gold locket emerged, heart-shaped and engraved with intricate flowers. "Oh, Pa," she breathed, recognizing the necklace her mother had worn on special occasions. "Open it," George encouraged. Lucy carefully worked the tiny clasp. Inside were 2 miniature portraits, one of her mother as a young woman, the other of her father, both painted in the early days of their marriage. "I had the portraits done in secret as a gift for our first anniversary," George explained. "Your mother treasured it. Said it kept us close to her heart always." Tears welled in Lucy's eyes as she closed the locket and clutched it tightly. "Thank you. I'll wear it tomorrow," George nodded, blinking rapidly. "Your mother would have liked Griffin, you know. She always said you deserved someone who could see the treasure you are." Lucy smiled through her tears, imagining her mother's approval of the man who had indeed seen the value in her that others had missed. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow glistening in the winter sunlight. Lucy woke early, her heart pounding with anticipation of the day ahead. The wedding was to be held at noon in the small church, followed by a celebration at the Circle M Ranch, where Mr. Mitchell had generously offered the use of the main house. As tradition dictated, Griffin had spent the night elsewhere in his case at the bunkhouse and would not see Lucy until the ceremony. She missed him acutely, having grown accustomed to his daily presence in her life. Lucy bathed in water heated on the stove, then carefully dressed in her wedding gown with the help of Mrs. Peterson, who had volunteered to assist in the absence of a mother or sisters. The older woman's eyes misted as she buttoned the back of the dress and arranged Lucy's hair in a crown of braids interwoven with small white flowers from the town's greenhouse. "You look like an angel," Mrs. Peterson declared, stepping back to admire her work. Lucy studied her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The ivory dress emphasized the creamy quality of her skin, making her freckles seem less prominent. Her hair, usually pulled back severely, framed her face softly, bringing out the blue of her eyes. Around her neck hung her mother's locket, a tangible connection to the past as she stepped into her future. "Is that really me?" she whispered. Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "It's always been you, dear. You're just seeing what what Griffin has seen all along." A knock at the door announced the arrival of the wagon that would take Lucy and her father to the church. George Vaughn entered the bedroom, stopping short at the sight of his daughter. "Lucy girl," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "you look just like your mother." It was the highest compliment he could have paid her, and Lucy felt fresh tears threatening. "Don't make me cry, Pa. Mrs. Peterson will never forgive me if I ruin her handiwork," George chuckled, composing himself. "Well, we can't have that. Your chariot awaits, my dear." The short journey to the church passed in a blur for Lucy. The streets of Clearwater Creek were deserted, everyone already gathered at the church to witness the marriage of Griffin Keegan and Lucy Vaughn, an event that had become the talk of the town, for better or worse. As the wagon pulled up to the church, Lucy's nervousness returned in full force. What if Griffin had changed his mind? What if he took one look at her and realized he'd made a mistake? "Ready?" her father asked, helping her down from the wagon. Lucy took a deep breath of the crisp winter air. "Ready," she affirmed, taking his arm. The church doors opened, and a hush fell over the assembled guests as Lucy appeared on her father's arm. She was vaguely aware of the decorated interior evergreen boughs and red ribbons for Christmas, supplemented with white flowers for the wedding, but her eyes sought only one person. Griffin stood at the altar, tall and handsome in a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. When he saw Lucy, his face transformed with a look of such pure joy and love that it banished her doubts in an instant. This was right. This was meant to be. As she walked slowly down the aisle toward him, Lucy was conscious of the watching eyes of the townspeople. She caught glimpses of familiar faces, Mrs. Peterson smiling encouragingly, Priscilla Henderson looking sour despite her festive green dress, the ranch hands from Circle M grinning broadly at their friend's happiness. But none of them mattered. Only Griffin, watching her approach with eyes that shone with unshed tears, his love for her visible to anyone who cared to look. When she reached him, her father placed her hand in Griffin's, the symbolic gesture of giving his daughter to her new husband. Griffin's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and reassuring. "You're beautiful," he whispered so only she could hear. "So are you," she whispered back, making him smile. The ceremony itself was traditional and brief. They exchanged vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another for all the days of their lives. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Griffin's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, causing several of the ranch hands to whoop and applaud. As they turned to face their guests, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Griffin Keegan, Lucy felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. This man, this day, this life they were beginning together, it was everything she had never dared to dream of, but now couldn't imagine living without. The celebration at the Circle M was joyous and relaxed. Mr. Mitchell, a widower in his 60s, had opened his home with characteristic generosity, and the large dining room was filled with tables laden with food prepared by the ranch cook and contributions from various townspeople. Lucy and Griffin sat at the head table, accepting congratulations and well wishes from guests. Even Priscilla Henderson managed a tight smile and murmured felicitations, though her eyes remained cold. "Don't let her spoil this day," Griffin murmured, noticing Lucy's expression as Priscilla walked away. "She's just jealous because she knows I got the best woman in the territory." Lucy smiled, leaning into his solid presence beside her. "And I got the best man." As the afternoon progressed into evening, there was dancing and laughter, storytelling and toasts. Lucy's father surprised everyone with a heartfelt speech about his daughter's strength and the joy of seeing her find a partner worthy of her. "To Lucy and Griffin," he concluded, raising his glass. "May your lives together be as rich in love as you both deserve." "To Lucy and Griffin," the guests echoed, drinking to the couple's health and happiness. As the winter sky darkened outside, Griffin leaned close to his new wife. "Ready to see our home?" he asked, his voice husky with meaning. Lucy nodded, suddenly shy but eager to begin their life together properly. They said their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations and enduring good-natured teasing from the ranch hands about the wedding night ahead. Outside, Griffin had a surprise waiting, a new sleigh borrowed from Mr. Mitchell, hitched to Griffin's own horse. He helped Lucy into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her before climbing in beside her and taking up the reins. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Keegan," he said, bending to kiss her as the horse set off, bells jingling merrily in the still night air. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Keegan," she replied, nestling against his side. The Lawson cabin, now the Keegan cabin, was a short distance from the main ranch house, nestled among a stand of pines that provided shelter from the winter winds. As they approached, Lucy gasped in delight. The small structure glowed with warm light from within, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. "The boys helped me get it ready," Griffin explained, helping her from the sleigh. "Lit the fire, brought in your things from your father's place." He scooped her up into his arms before she could protest, carrying her across the threshold in the traditional manner. Inside, Lucy was amazed at the transformation. What had been a neglected, abandoned cabin was now a cozy home. The main room held a table and chairs, a small sofa before the fireplace, shelves for books and personal items. A curtain partially screened the smaller room, where she glimpsed a bed covered with a colorful quilt she recognized as one she had made the previous winter. "Griffin, it's wonderful," she breathed as he set her gently on her feet. He looked around proudly. "It's not much, but it's ours, and someday we'll have something bigger, better." Lucy turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest. "This is perfect. I don't need anything bigger or better." "Just you?" Griffin's eyes darkened as he looked down at her, his wife, in their home. "You have me," he promised, bending to kiss her with a passion that had been carefully restrained throughout the day. "Forever." As snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Lucy and Griffin began their life together, finding in each other's arms the belonging they had both sought for so long. The winter months passed in a blur of newlywed bliss for Lucy and Griffin. Their small cabin became a haven of warmth and love amid the harsh Wyoming winter. Lucy quickly settled into the rhythms of being a rancher's wife, rising before dawn to prepare Griffin's breakfast, tending to their home while he worked with the cattle, welcoming him home at dusk with a hot meal and eager conversation about their days. Griffin proved to be as devoted a husband as he had been a suitor. He never failed to notice Lucy's efforts, whether it was a new curtain she had sewn for the window or a special dish she had prepared. Most importantly, he continued to make her feel beautiful and cherished, his eyes lighting up whenever she entered the room, even after a long day's work. "How did I get so lucky?" he would often ask, pulling her into his arms as they sat before the fire in the evenings. Lucy would smile and remind him that she was the lucky one to have found a man who saw beyond appearances to the person beneath. In Griffin's love, she blossomed, growing more confident and self-assured with each passing day. Their physical relationship, initially approached with shyness on Lucy's part, quickly became a source of joy and deep connection. Griffin was patient and tender, and Lucy discovered a passion within herself that matched his own. In the privacy of their bed, all insecurities fell away, leaving only two people who loved each other completely. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it new growth and the bustle of calving season, Lucy had news of her own to share. She waited until a quiet evening when Griffin returned from a long day in the saddle, tired but content. As they sat at their small table, enjoying a simple supper of stew and fresh bread, Lucy gathered her courage. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Griffin looked up, instantly alert. "What is it?" Lucy placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby in November." Griffin's face went blank with shock for a moment, then split into the widest grin Lucy had ever seen. He was on his feet in an instant, pulling her up into an embrace that lifted her off the ground. "A baby. We're having a baby," he repeated, spinning her around in their small kitchen. Lucy laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Yes, but you'll make me dizzy if you keep spinning." Griffin immediately set her down, his expression turning to concern. "I'm sorry, are you all right? Should you be resting? Do you need anything?" His sudden protectiveness made Lucy smile. "I'm fine, Griffin. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can still do everything I normally do, at least for now. But Griffin was already planning, his mind racing ahead. We'll need a cradle, and more space, another room for the baby. I'll talk to Mr. Mitchell about expanding the cabin. He paused, his eyes softening as he placed a gentle hand over hers on her stomach. Our child, our family. The wonder in his voice touched Lucy deeply. She had known Griffin wanted children, they had spoken of it often, but seeing his joy made her own happiness complete. This child would be raised in love, would never know the sting of cruel words or the ache of feeling unwanted. Boy or girl? Griffin asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Lucy shrugged. We won't know until November. Does it matter to you? Griffin shook his head firmly. Not a bit. Healthy is all I care about, healthy and happy like their mother. The news of Lucy's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community of Clearwater Creek. Most reactions were positive. Mrs. Peterson immediately began knitting baby clothes, and Mr. Mitchell gave his blessing for the cabin expansion, even offering to help with the work. Priscilla Henderson, predictably, had her own interpretation. Well, that explains the rushed wedding, she remarked to her circle of friends, loud enough for Lucy to hear when they crossed paths at church. At least now we know why he married her. Lucy, who would once have been crushed by such insinuations, merely smiled and placed a protective hand over her stomach. She knew the truth that their child had been conceived well after the wedding, that Griffin had chosen her freely and with his whole heart. As spring gave way to summer, the Keegan cabin underwent a transformation. Griffin and the other ranch hands, along with Lucy's father, added a small third room to serve as a nursery. Lucy sewed curtains and a quilt for the cradle that George crafted with loving care for his first grandchild. The summer was not without challenges. The work of the ranch was demanding, especially during the hot months, and Griffin often returned home exhausted. A dry spell threatened the grazing lands, causing worry about the cattle's welfare. And as Lucy's pregnancy progressed, she found herself tiring more easily, the summer heat making her uncomfortable. But through it all, their love remained strong, their excitement about the coming child binding them even closer together. Each evening, Griffin would talk to Lucy's growing belly, telling the baby stories about the ranch, about how he had met their mother, about the life they would have together. Your mama is the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman in the territory, he would say, making Lucy blush. And you're the luckiest baby in the world to have her. In late July, a summer storm brought needed rain but also destruction. Lightning struck one of the Circle Mtkes barns, setting it ablaze. The entire ranch turned out to fight the fire, forming a bucket brigade from the creek to the burning structure. Lucy, despite Griffin's protests that she should stay home, joined the women providing water and food to the firefighters. The flames were eventually extinguished, but not before the barn was reduced to charred timbers. Worse, 2 valuable horses had been lost in the blaze, a significant financial blow to the ranch. In the aftermath, Mr. Mitchell called a meeting of all the ranch hands. The loss of the barn and horses, combined with the earlier dry spell affecting the grazing lands, had put the Circle M in a difficult position. I'm going to have to let some of you go, he announced grimly. Not permanently, I hope, just until we can rebuild and recover. Lucy, waiting anxiously at home, felt her heart sink when Griffin returned earlier than expected, his expression troubled. What happened? She asked. Immediately sensing something was wrong, Griffin removed his hat, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Mitchell's cutting back. Letting go of the newer hands until things improve. Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. And you're one of the newer ones. Griffin nodded, his jaw tight. Got 2 weeks' pay as severance, said he'd hire me back first thing when he can, but that could be months. The timing couldn't have been worse. With the baby due in November and winter following close behind, they needed steady income more than ever. Lucy crossed the room to take Griffin's hands in hers. We'll be all right, she said firmly. You'll find other work. Griffin squeezed her hands gratefully, but worry still creased his brow. Jobs are scarce this time of year. Most ranches have all the hands they need for summer. Then we'll manage with what we have until something comes along, Lucy declared. I have my sewing money, and we've been saving. We won't starve. Griffin pulled her into a fierce embrace. What did I do to deserve you? He murmured into her hair. Lucy held him tightly, offering the comfort of her presence while her mind raced ahead, calculating their resources, planning how they would stretch their savings until Griffin found new employment. The next few weeks were difficult. Griffin rode out each day, visiting nearby ranches and farms in search of work, but returned each evening with the same news: nothing available, at least not for more than a day or two of labor. Lucy did her part by taking in extra sewing, ignoring Griffin's concern that she was working too hard in her condition. Her father also helped, sharing the bounty from his vegetable garden and bringing game when his hunting was successful. Despite their efforts, their savings dwindled alarmingly fast. Griffin grew more frustrated and withdrawn with each passing day, taking his failure to provide personally, despite Lucy's assurances that they would weather this storm together. In late August, just as their situation was becoming truly dire, an unexpected opportunity arose. The stagecoach line that ran through Clearwater Creek was looking for guards for the route between their town and the territorial capital, a 3-day journey each way, with 2 runs per month. It's dangerous work, Griffin admitted when he told Lucy about the position. There have been robberies on that route, but it pays well better than ranch work. Lucy felt her heart constrict at the thought of Griffin facing such risks, but she knew they had little choice. If you think it's best, she said, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Griffin studied her face, reading her concern despite her efforts to hide it. I don't like being away from you, especially now. But it would mean I'm home half the month, and we'd have enough to see us through winter and the baby's arrival. Lucy nodded, forcing a smile. Then you should take it. We'll be fine. Griffin was hired immediately, his experience with horses and reputation for reliability making him an ideal candidate. He would guard the outgoing stage and return on the next one 3 days later, giving him a week at home before the next run. His first departure was the hardest. Lucy stood outside their cabin, waving as the stagecoach pulled away, then returned inside to the suddenly empty home, now 7 months pregnant and alone for the first time since their marriage. She kept busy with sewing, preparation for the baby, and visits from her father and the wives of other ranch hands, but the nights were long and lonely. She found herself talking to her unborn child more often, finding comfort in the movements that assured her she wasn't truly alone. Your papa will be home soon, she would say, rubbing her swollen belly. He's working hard for us, making sure we have everything we need. When Griffin returned 3 days later, their reunion was joyous. He swept her into his arms carefully, mindful of her condition, and held her as if he'd been gone for months instead of days. I missed you every minute, he confessed, his hands gentle on her rounded stomach. Both of you. The pattern of their life adjusted to this new rhythm: intense joy during the weeks Griffin was home, stoic endurance during his absences. The job was indeed well-paying, allowing them to rebuild their savings and purchase necessary items for the baby's arrival. But it came with risks. On his 3rd run, Griffin returned with a grazed arm, the result of an attempted robbery that the guards had successfully fought off. Lucy's heart nearly stopped at the sight of the bandage, though Griffin insisted it was nothing more than a scratch. This is why they pay us so well, he said, trying to make light of it. But don't worry, most runs are uneventful. Lucy nodded, but as her pregnancy advanced and her time grew nearer, she found herself increasingly anxious whenever Griffin was away. What if something happened to him? What if the baby came while he was gone? October brought cooler weather and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. The nursery was ready, filled with the cradle George had made, the quilt and clothes Lucy had sewn, and small gifts from well-wishers in the community. Griffin arranged to take a month off from the stagecoach runs beginning in early November, ensuring he would be home for the birth. The company, valuing his service, agreed to hold his position until he was ready to return. "I won't leave you alone for this," he promised Lucy, his hand resting protectively over her now prominent belly. "Not for anything." As November began, Lucy felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The baby could come any day now, and while she had Mrs. Peterson's assurance that she would assist with the birth, Lucy couldn't help but be nervous. Griffin was attentive to her every need, insisting she rest while he took over many of the household chores. He chopped extra firewood, stocked the pantry with provisions, and made sure everything was in readiness for their child's arrival. "You're going to be a wonderful father," Lucy told him one evening as they sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders while her head rested against his chest. Griffin's voice was thick with emotion when he replied, "I hope so. I never had much of an example, lost my pa when I was young. But I know what I want to give our child: security, love, a place to belong. Everything I didn't have. Everything you and I have found together." Lucy turned her face up to his, touched by his words. "That's exactly what makes you perfect for this. You know what matters." Their child chose that night to begin its journey into the world. Lucy woke in the early hours of the morning to the first contractions, mild but unmistakable. She nudged Griffin awake, trying to keep her voice calm. "Griffin, I think it's starting." He was instantly alert, sitting up in bed with an expression that might have been comical under other circumstances, a mixture of excitement, terror, and determination. "Are you sure?" "Should I get Mrs. Peterson? Do you need water? What can I do?" The questions tumbled out in a rush. Lucy couldn't help but smile despite the discomfort. "It's early yet. First babies take their time, but yes, you should fetch Mrs. Peterson soon." The next 18 hours were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and ultimately, overwhelming joy. Mrs. Peterson arrived promptly, bringing her experience and calm efficiency. Griffin, after being firmly banished from the bedroom during the delivery itself, paced the main room of the cabin like a caged lion, jumping at every sound from behind the closed door. When at last Mrs. Peterson emerged, her face wreathed in smiles, Griffin nearly knocked her over in his haste. "You have a daughter, Mr. Keegan," she announced. "A beautiful, healthy girl. Your wife did wonderfully." Griffin stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the news that he was the father of a daughter. Then he was moving, entering the bedroom where Lucy lay propped against pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Griffin," she said, her voice tired but filled with joy. "Come meet your daughter." He approached the bed almost reverently, sinking down beside his wife and peering at the tiny face nestled in the blankets. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, pink cheeks, and when she opened her eyes, Griffin saw that they were the deep blue of all newborns, but with a shape that promised they would remain so like her mother's. "She's perfect," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the impossibly soft cheek. "Absolutely perfect." Lucy smiled, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of Griffin's wonder. "What shall we call her?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any, wanting to meet their child first. Now, looking at the tiny girl who was the physical embodiment of their love, Griffin knew. "Hope," he said softly. "Her name is Hope. Because that's what she is, everything I hoped for, everything I never dared to hope for before I met you." Lucy's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Hope Elizabeth Keegan," she agreed, adding her mother's name as they had discussed. Mrs. Peterson, who had been quietly tidying up, paused to smile at the new family. "A beautiful name for a beautiful child," she approved before discreetly withdrawing to give them privacy. Left alone with his wife and newborn daughter, Griffin carefully sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Lucy's shoulders while the other hovered protectively near the baby. "Thank you," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "For Hope, for loving me, for everything." Lucy leaned into his strength, grateful for his solid presence. Thank you for seeing me that day at the market, for changing everything. Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. Best thing I ever did, he murmured. The day I found the only beauty I needed to see. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing Clearwater Creek in pristine white. But inside the Keegan cabin, warmed by fire and love, a new family embarked on their journey together. Lucy, Griffin, and Hope, their future as bright and full of promise as the daughter they had created. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the Keegan family. Griffin continued working for the stagecoach company, eventually being promoted to route manager, which meant less travel and more administrative work, a welcome change that allowed him to be home more consistently with his growing family. For the family had indeed grown. 2 years after Hope's birth, Lucy delivered a son they named George after her father. And just last spring, they had welcomed another daughter, Emma, completing their family. The most significant change, however, came 3 years after Hope's birth, when Griffin was able to purchase a small ranch of his own 60 acres of good grazing land with a sturdy house, not far from Clearwater Creek. It wasn't a large operation, but it was theirs, and Griffin took immense pride in building it into a successful enterprise, raising both cattle and horses with a skill born of years of experience. Lucy thrived as both mother and ranch wife. Her sewing business continued, now expanded to include not only practical items, but also the fine embroidery for which she had developed a reputation throughout the region. Women who had once mocked her now commissioned her work for special occasions, an irony not lost on Lucy but one she accepted with grace. Clearwater Creek itself had grown into a proper town, with a school where Hope now attended as one of the brightest pupils, much to her parents' pride. The mercantile had expanded. There was now a proper hotel instead of just rooms above the saloon, and the church had been renovated to accommodate the growing congregation. Some things remained unchanged, however. Priscilla Henderson, now Priscilla Blackwood after marrying a banker from the territorial capital, still visited Clearwater Creek regularly to see her parents and still regarded Lucy with barely concealed disdain. But Lucy found that such attitudes no longer had the power to hurt her. Her life was too full, too blessed for petty concerns. On a warm summer day very much like the one when she had first met Griffin, Lucy stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching her husband teaching 5-year-old Hope to ride her new pony while George, now 3, bounced impatiently at the corral fence, eager for his turn. Baby Emma slept in Lucy's arms, her tiny features peaceful in slumber. The scene before her filled Lucy's heart with contentment. Hope sat straight and proud on the gentle pony, her dark hair so like Griffin's escaping from its braids as she carefully followed her father's instructions. Griffin walked alongside, one hand ready to steady the child if needed, his face alight with pride and love. "Look, Mama," Hope called excitedly. "I'm riding all by myself, I see, sweetheart," Lucy called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Griffin glanced up, catching Lucy's eye across the yard. The love that passed between them in that look was as strong and true as it had been on their wedding day, deepened by the years and experiences they had shared. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lucy and Griffin sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Griffin's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him in the familiar position that had become their habit. "I saw Priscilla in town today," Lucy mentioned casually. "She's visiting her parents for the summer." Griffin made a non-committal sound. "Did she have anything pleasant to say for once?" Lucy chuckled. "Actually, yes, in her way. She commented that marriage and motherhood seem to agree with me and that I'm looking well for someone with 3 small children." Griffin snorted. "High praise indeed from Mrs. Blackwood." "I think it's as close to an apology as I'll ever get," Lucy said thoughtfully. "For all those years of unkindness." Griffin turned to study her face in the fading light. "Does it still bother you, what she and the others said back then?" Lucy considered the question honestly. "No," she said finally. "It seems like another lifetime before you, before the children, before I understood what really matters." Griffin nodded, satisfied with her answer. "You know, I've been thinking about that day at the market a lot lately." "Oh, why is that?" He smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Because hope is starting to get your freckles. And the other day I overheard one of the boys at school teasing her about them." Lucy straightened, immediately concerned for her daughter. "What happened?" Griffin's smile widened. "Our girl lifted her chin just like her mama does and said, 'My papa says freckles are angel kisses and I have more than anyone because angels love me best.' Then she just walked away, head high." Pride and love swelled in Lucy's chest. "She's stronger than I was." "Because she's never doubted her worth," Griffin said softly. "Never doubted that she's loved. That's your doing, Lucy, yours and mine together." Lucy leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for the life they had built. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day? If you just walked past like everyone else?" Griffin tightened his arm around her. "Never happened, couldn't have happened. The moment I saw you standing there, with your head up despite their cruelty, I was already yours. Just took me a few minutes to get my courage up to speak." Lucy turned her face up to his, still touched by his unwavering devotion after all these years. "I'm glad you found your courage." "Best thing I ever did," Griffin murmured, bending to kiss her softly. "Telling the truth about the only beauty I needed to see." As the stars continued to emerge above their home, Lucy Keegan thought about the journey that had brought her here from the lonely, insecure young woman at the market to the confident wife and mother she was today. She thought about the power of being truly seen, truly loved, and how it had transformed her life. And as Griffin's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, their fingers intertwining in the familiar gesture that had comforted her through childbirth, hard times, and moments of joy, Lucy knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not just a physical home, but a belonging of the heart that nothing could ever take away. "I love you, Griffin Keegan," she whispered, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you, Lucy Keegan," he replied, his voice carrying the same wonder it had held on their wedding day. "Until the stars fall from the sky." In the nursery behind them, Emma stirred and began to fuss. Lucy rose, Griffin close behind her, ready to tend to their youngest together. Another night in the life they had built, ordinary in its routines but extraordinary in its richness. And as they moved through their home, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their love, the children sleeping in their beds, the photographs on the walls, the small treasures collected over years of shared life, Lucy knew that the cruel words once spoken at a market day had long since faded, replaced by the truth Griffin had seen from the beginning. She was beautiful. She was loved. She was enough. And that was the only beauty that had ever truly mattered.